wrong twin. I always knew something was wrong with my brother, even before the accident, even before the night everything changed. We weren't identical, but we were close. Same height, same build. The kind of twins people struggle to tell apart at a glance. Our mother would joke about it when we were kids. How if we swapped clothes, even she might get confused. But I always knew. I always knew which one was me and which one was him until the night the car went off the road, until the night only one of us came back. It had been raining, a downpour so thick the headlights barely cut through it. I remember the weight of the air, the hum of the radio, the faint scent of wet earth through the cracked windows, and then the screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the world turning upside down. I don't remember screaming. I only remember the moment the car stopped moving. Metal twisted around us, the windshield a web of cracks, the rain slamming against the roof like impatient fingers, and the silence, the wrongness of it. I turned my head, vision swimming. My twin sat beside me, slumped against the dashboard. Blood dripped from his temple, pooling in the hollow of his collarbone. He wasn't moving. My breath hitched. My hands shook as I reached for him. Liam, no response. His chest rose, slow, shallow, alive. I tried to move, but pain lanced through my ribs, my skull pounding with each heartbeat. My vision blurred, and then the whispering started, faint, almost lost beneath the rain. I froze. The sound was coming from the darkness beyond the broken window, from outside the wreck. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Something was out there, watching, waiting. The whispers grew louder, a dozen voices layered and stretched, words slipping through the gaps of reality. Then, a hand pressed against the shattered glass. Not mine, not my brother's, something else. And I blacked out. I woke up in the hospital. The room was sterile. The beeping of machines, the hush of distant voices, the ache in my skull felt like it had settled into my bones. And beside my bed, Liam sat watching me. His eyes were dull, shadowed, his skin too pale, stretched too tight, something in my chest twisted. Liam, my voice came hoarse, unfamiliar. He didn't answer. Not at first. Then a slow smile. Wrong. Too slow, too forced, like someone remembering how a face should move. "You're awake," he said. His voice was right, but something in it was not. Days passed. The doctor said we were lucky, that the accident should have been fatal. But I didn't feel lucky. Not when I looked at my brother, not when I realized he was watching me all the time. His gaze never lingered where it should. It followed the wrong moments, the wrong movements. Too focused on the way I held my fork, the way I tied my shoes, as if he was studying me, learning, or imitating. And then I saw his reflection, not his face, something else. It happened in the hallway mirror. I had just woken up. The air was heavy with rain. Liam stood in the kitchen unmoving, staring out the window, his back to me. I glanced at the mirror beside me and froze. Liam's reflection was already looking at me. His real body still faced the window, but his reflection was turned, watching, smiling. My stomach turned to ice, my throat locked. Then he moved. His real body, slowly, deliberately, turned to match the reflection. And in that moment, I knew that was not my brother. I didn't sleep that night. Not after what I had seen. Not after I remembered the hand on the window of the wreck. Not after the whispering in the dark. Liam was different. Or no, not different. Wrong. Like something had crawled into his skin. And he knew I had noticed. His movements became sharper, his gaze heavier. I would catch him in doorways, watching me from the shadows, his head tilted in something almost curious, almost amused. And the whispering returned, slipping through the vents, through the walls, from his room at night. I started locking my door. It didn't help, because last night I woke up to him standing in my room. The lock was still in place, but he was inside, smiling, watching, and his lips were moving. But the voice was still coming from the hallway. Two voices, one in the room, one just beyond the door, whispering in unison. The air froze. My breath hitched. Then together the voices said, "You brought me back." I couldn't breathe. Liam took a step forward. The light hit his face. And for the first time, I saw what was wrong. The shape of his jaw, off by inches. The stretch of his skin, not quite human. And his eyes, not brown like before. Black, empty. Something else was wearing his face. Something else had come back in his place. I scrambled back, heartbeat slamming against my ribs. My vision blurred, my hands shaking as I reached for anything to defend myself. And then he laughed. Not Liam's laugh, not even human. A layered sound splitting through the air, too many voices at once. And then he spoke one last time. You picked the wrong twin, the wrong twin. Then the lights went out. It began as static, a faint whisper through the speakers of an old radio, a frequency no one had touched in years. The signal was weak, distorted, like a voice trying to crawl through the cracks of reality. James thought it was interference at first, just another broken relic in the abandoned station. Then the voice spoke his name. The hairs on his arms stood on end. His fingers trembled as he turned the dial, but no matter where he moved it, the voice stayed, faint, lingering, calling. The old radio station had been shut down for nearly a decade. James was only here because the city wanted an assessment before demolition. A simple job: photograph the decay, list the damages, and leave. But now something was talking to him. He stepped back from the control board, his breath shallow. The room was dim, the only light seeping through the cracked windows. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by something unseen, and the static continued. James. The voice was warped, stretched like a dying transmission. He swallowed hard, his name. It had said his name. His fingers hovered over the switch. He needed to turn it off. He needed to walk out and never look back. But then the voice spoke again. Don't go. His breath hitched. The radio crackled, the static deepening. Something shifted in the air. And then, beneath the distortion, he heard breathing. Not his own, something else. Something waiting. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed closer, and then the lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, the reflection in the dusty glass showed him something wrong. Not his own shadow. Something behind him. Watching, waiting. The static surged, the air thinned, and then silence. James did not turn around. He did not breathe. The voice had stopped. The lights flickered again, and then the radio turned itself off. He stumbled backward, heart hammering against his ribs. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. And then from the darkened corner of the room, a click. A microphone turned on, and a voice. Clear, close, too close. We're still here. The tape should not have been running. Everything was unplugged. The equipment was rotting. The station had been abandoned for years. But when James checked the recorder, the reel was spinning, and something was being recorded. His breath came shallow. The whispering had returned. It was no longer coming from the radio. It was coming from everywhere, through the vents, the walls, the broken speakers hanging from the ceiling, voices overlapping, layers of static. Not one, not two, dozens, hundreds. A chorus of whispers trapped in the dead air. The words were unclear, shifting in and out of understanding. Some were pleading, some were laughing, some were screaming. James staggered back, the floor creaking beneath his weight. The voices swelled, and then the microphone moved, not by his hand, by something else. It turned toward him. A single voice broke through the chaos. It was his own, but distorted, warped, speaking words he had never said. It's too late. The reel spun faster. The air hummed. Something in the room shifted. And then, all at once, everything stopped. The radio was dead. The tapes were still. The air was thick with silence. But James knew. He was not alone. He left the station before nightfall, his hands shaking, his mind unraveling. He did not tell anyone. He could not. But something followed. At night, when he turned off the lights, the static returned. Through his television, his phone, the dead channels that should not exist. And then, the voices. They whispered through the silence, the same words, over and over. We're still here. And somewhere, deep beneath the noise, he heard himself, speaking words he had never said, on a broadcast that was never meant to end.